What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got another reaction to the Ramones, this time their album Rocket to Russia, brought to us by friend, longtime supporter, and Ramones superfan, Evan David. Thank you, Evan David. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out that Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. We could not do without the patrons. Running a free trial right now. Go over there and check it out. All right, I've already done the first two albums. We're doing the first 5 albums of the Ramones discography. So look for those in the Ramones playlist after this. Just type Ramones in that box up above. Evan David always gives these great breakdowns of the album, so we're going to get to that in just a second, but I'm going to give you a heads up. The music won't be in the video. It'll be in a Vimeo link below, so go check that out right now so you can listen along with us. All right, Evan David says, rock and roll legend has it that the genesis of the Ramones' third, and in the view of many fans and critics alike, perhaps their best studio album, November 1977's Rocket to Russia, can be traced back to the 21st of August of that year when the band convened in Media Sound Studios, a former Episcopalian church in the Midtown Manhattan area of New York, in a manner which strongly suggested that they were fully bound and determined to recapture their place at the forefront of the burgeoning worldwide punk movement, with which their iconic debut album in particular had done so much to inspire in the first place during the previous year. As author Tom Carson once memorably put it, quote, "To be in New York that summer was to have some sense of what it must have been like to live in San Francisco in 66 or 67, or in London when the Beatles and the Stones first hit. And it's certainly the case that the creative rivalries between different musicians, which had done so much to fuel the artistic fires, which had blazed so brightly during those earlier periods, were also keenly felt during this time to boot," Evan David says, and not least by the Ramones themselves. For as the album's sound designer and de facto producer, of which more later, Ed Stasium, who's fantastic, by the way, once recalled, "I walked into the Media Sound on the first day of recording, and Johnny has the Pistols' God Save the Queen record, and he said, 'These guys ripped us off, and I want to sound better than this.' And we put it on and said, 'No problem.'" Now, I will say this quote from Tom Carson is a bit hyperbole, because none of these groups, the Ramones or anyone else, were anywhere in the freaking area code or vicinity of anything in San Francisco in 66 or 67 or in London when the Beatles and Stones first hit. The great majority of people had no idea who they were. I had to clear that up a little bit. I get it. Reporters and guys who have a passion for something get carried away. But this sense of increasing artistic self-confidence, which was thus felt by the Ramones and their associates, also perhaps reflected the apparently increased confidence which Ramones' own record label, Sire Records, similarly also held with regard to the band's prospective fortunes at this time. For perhaps buoyed by the relative chart success, albeit largely overseas, of their most recent single, the seminal Sheena is a Punk Rocker, of which more later, they had given the Ramones a vastly increased recording budget of between $25,000 and $30,000 for this album, the equivalent of roughly $130,000 to $158,000 in 2024 money when I'm recording this, which, while still perhaps is not exactly what you would call a megastar budget then or now, nevertheless still represented a considerable advance from the mere $6,400 or $35,000 in 2024, which they had notoriously been allocated to record their aforementioned debut album a year or so earlier. While this extra funding would certainly allow the recording quality of their third album to be considerably enhanced, however, it also remains fair to say that the band themselves did not allow it to affect their pre-existing sense of professionalism, bordering upon being spendthrifts, with guitarist Johnny Ramone in particular sagely remarking how, in the face of studio costs amounting to $150 per studio hour at the time, quote, "It doesn't matter if you spend $100,000 or $30,000, it's best to do it quickly. If the engineer said a take was good, we go on to the next one. You don't want to sit there and BS. It's your money they're spending." What a mature way of looking at that, because a lot of artists just didn't care, right? As recording progressed, meanwhile, it became apparent that as the album's official co-producer and drummer Tommy Ramone recalled, quote, "We were on a roll in high gear touring and everything. We thought we were going to make it, that we were on the launching pad, even if it was a little difficult to write the songs because we had to write them in hotel rooms. Once we got into the studio, we felt we were in control, that we were in our prime," end quote. Moreover, and even as the finished album was finally being mastered at the newly built Power Station recording studio in Hell's Kitchen, New York, prior to its scheduled November release, the fact that its other official co-producer, Tony Bon Jovi, yeah, he's related, had been busy getting the Power Station ready for action during the intervening months may explain why, and despite a lack of official credit to that effect, which always hurts, right, Ed Stasium had in practice taken on many of the day-to-day production duties for Rocket to Russia, with Johnny Ramone later going so far as to claim that Bon Jovi didn't do anything on this album. He wasn't even there. The Ramones suddenly found themselves with the enticing prospect of not only having their existing record label in their proverbial corner, but in the wake of Sire Records having themselves recently signed a distribution deal with Warner Brothers Records, which is a great thing, of being fully backed by the resources of a major record label for the first time in their careers. Despite all this seeming positivity, however, and even as Rocket to Russia was finally released to widespread critical acclaim on the 4th of November 1977, several key negative developments were beginning to occur, which would again scupper the Ramones' commercial fortunes and see them snatch defeat from the jaws of seemingly inevitable musical victory, as we shall now see. The first such negative development occurred just over 2 weeks after the album's release on November the 19th, 1977, when singer Joey Ramone suffered a major accident during the warm-up to a gig at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey, when a tea kettle, which he had been using as a makeshift vaporizer to brew steam which he could inhale to clear both his throat and his nasal cavities before singing, instead badly scalded Joey to an extent that despite somehow still being able to perform on the night of the gig itself, which is amazing in its own right, nevertheless led him to be rushed to the hospital shortly afterwards with second and third degree burns, with the result that Joey was laid up around 3 weeks. This in turn also inevitably led to the cancellation of the U.S. tour, which the Ramones had just been beginning at that time, thus depriving both the band and the album alike of a significant chunk of live exposure and commercial momentum in their homeland at this critical juncture. The accident did, however, yield some significant long-term creative fruit, as it was while recuperating from it that Joey wrote perhaps the Ramones' second or third most well-known song, I Want to Be Sedated, of which more in next month's review of the Ramones' fourth studio album, Road to Ruin. Elsewhere, meanwhile, and almost the same time as Rocket to Russia's own release, the aforementioned Sex Pistols had issued their own notoriously iconic punk album, Nevermind the Bullocks, which I just recently put a reaction up to on the channel, which soon proved to be not only a zeitgeist-seizing, even revolutionary musical statement in its own right, but also one which would unfortunately go on to adversely affect the Ramones' own future career prospects in two key ways. To begin with, and as Ramones biographer Everett True once put it, there was henceforth a danger that the Ramones would be perceived as having fallen behind their more attention-grabbing punk peers, and thus increasingly being labeled as being not serious enough for the politicized music press and not arty enough to be lumped in with their former CBGBers like Talking Heads. The Ramones were becoming outcasts in the scene they'd helped inspire. No one likes to be seen enjoying cartoons, even though everyone does. Even more significant, however, was the widespread hostility and distaste which the Pistols' more outrageous antics, especially during the ill-fated U.S. tour which led to the band's breakup in early 1978, had engendered in the minds of the wider American record-buying public in particular, with the end result that, as Joey Ramone in turn once put it, everyone flipped out and then things changed radically. It really kind of screwed things up for us. Indeed, punk journalist and historian Legs McNeil once aptly summed up the effects of this anti-punk backlash on the Ramones' careers as followed. Quote, safety pins, razor blades, chopped haircuts, snarling, vomiting, everything that had nothing to do with the Ramones was suddenly in vogue, and it killed any chance Rocket to Russia had of getting any airplay. And as a result of this, Rocket to Russia, while still managing to achieve what might otherwise be seen as relatively respectable number 49 in the US and 60 in the UK, has nevertheless often been seen in terms of what might have been, with many observers lamenting the Ramones' by now chronic inability to find that ever-elusive one big hit, which would have finally lifted them to the million-seller stratosphere of commercial success that the sheer quality of their music thus far undoubtedly deserved. Instead, as the head of Sire Records, Seymour Stein, put it, quote, Warner Brothers had been geared up in all departments, and when Rocket to Russia didn't live up to everybody's expectations, the Ramones became indelibly stamped in everyone's mind as a cult band that wasn't for everybody, end quote. Evan Davis says, this is a genuine shame, if not an outright miscarriage of justice, for Tommy Ramone, whose own role in the band would itself change significantly in the wake of these developments, with consequences that we shall also explore fully in next month's Ramones album review, put it, quote, Rocket to Russia was our peak in every way, in songwriting, in playing, performance, recording, production, where it was a well-made album. The Ramones were very fortunate in having 4 very talented songwriters. Different songs were written by different people. But it was great, because certainly starting with the second album, especially Rocket to Russia, a lot of the songs were started to be written all together, where we'd all basically contribute to the songs, end quote. And Evan David says, and it is above all the sheer quality of the songs in this album that have made it, well, not necessarily my own personal favorite Ramones album by any means. In fact, I for one prefer the next 2 albums, Road to Ruin and especially Into the Century, to this one. Nevertheless, a prime candidate to be regarded as, quote, Everett True once again puts it, the greatest studio album the Ramones made, official. It certainly becomes some of their finest songs, end quote. Thus, I look forward to seeing what both Sean and the wider RTTC community as a whole make of said songs and of the album as a whole, especially in comparison to the first 2 Ramones albums, both in the reaction itself and in the comments below. Just a reminder, the music won't be in the video, but it will be in the Vimeo link below. Let's get this thing going. With the first track, you see it below, Cretin Hop. Evan David says, well, someone suggested that this rabble-rousing opening tune owed its inspiration to the live audience of misfits that the Ramones attracted in the early days, pointing at the legendary CBGBs and elsewhere. According to Joey himself, it can be in fact more specifically traced to an occasion when, quote, we were staying in St. Paul, Minnesota. We went to some place to eat, and there were these Cretans all over the place, and there was a Cretan avenue where we drove into the city. In either case, this song is a prime example of what the Ramones' artistic director, Arturo Vega, was getting to when he recalled that by this point in their careers, the bands were, quote, getting a little better at trying to translate the speed and the intensity of the live performances, and I think that Rocket to Russia is the best attempt, end quote. Meanwhile, in order to give you a better idea of what the band were looking to capture from their live performances, we are going to react to the song being performed live at the Ramones' legendary New Year's Eve gig at the Rainbow Theatre in London on the 31st of January, 1977. A concert which would in turn shortly form the core of their equally legendary first album, live album, It's Alive. All right, I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Evan David. Cool to see everybody just get into. I mean, the Ramones are interesting to watch perform, right? Because they really get after it. But I mean, they're not going to, they're not really going to totally entertain you on stage, I guess would be the best way to put it. Not from their antics, right? They're just going to stand there and sing. But just the energy of the music and the energy of the crowd is fantastic to see. Good opener. Next up, we have Rockaway Beach, written by bassist Dee Dee Ramone, who was himself a frequent visitor to the real-life Rockaway Beach in the Queens area of New York, where the band hailed from, and emerging as the band's most successful U.S. single when it peaked at number 66 in the Billboard Hot 100, following its release in November of 77. This effortlessly charming surf rock throwback has been aptly described by Everett True as being, quote, insanely catchy with harmonies and a false ending on the chorus that would have done Brian Wilson proud. 2 minutes, 6 seconds of absolute pop nirvana. It was a natural subject for a band so in love with the 60s Americana and who could find beauty in the unlikeliest of spots. All right, Rockaway Beach, just so catchy, obviously. Such a good job. Kind of ironic they wanted to write a Beach Boys type song. Apparently this beach was a horrible place, like just kind of a dump, right? If you're from there, sorry, I'll just say everything I read, Evan David mentioned, but I researched some other stuff. So kind of ironic that the Ramones just, turned into a great little song. Next up at track number 3, we got Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. Apparently one of the earliest songs that Joey ever wrote back in his pre-Ramones days, and is such even containing a rare example of that elusive musical beast, the lesser-spotted Ramones guitar solo. This doom-laden slice of romantic melodrama is a prime example of what Legs McNeil once described as one of those Ramones love songs wherein, quote, Joey gets to pour out all that lament, yearning, teenage self-pity, and heartbreak that makes rock and roll so wonderfully self-indulgent, end quote. And it's certainly none the worse for that, Evan David says. All right, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. Basically the old age. It is a lament, the and he wants to be with her, but he knows it's time. It's time to be over. It's not going to work out, and he is really lamenting that. So very different musical style in these first 3 tunes. Next up, we have Locket Love, perhaps one of the most unfairly overlooked, underrated songs on the album. This deceptively lively, even innocent sounding Dee Dee written tune explores similar themes of teen romance to the previous song, with a certain sense of bitter venom laced with typically dark Ramones humor in its lyrics that definitely rewards repeated listenings, in my view. All right, Locket Love. I like it a little bit better, actually, than Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. A little more edge to it, but great guitar melody, nice chilled vocals. Next up, we have I Don't Care. Definitely taking what Everett True aptly described as, quote, the negative minimalism of the Ramones' early I Don't Wanna songs to their logical conclusion, end quote. The sinisterly simplistic tune remains one of, if not the most stripped back, bare bones punk songs ever written by the band, who were already established as a prototypical past masters of the form, in which, moreover, as Legs McNeil once put it, rhetorically asked, why get bogged down in specifics? Just chuck the whole lot. Joey's voice was the vocal incarnation of teen nihilism. All right, I Don't Care. A little bit more throwback to something that would have been on the debut. The songwriting obviously is next to nothing. That's the idea. It's 1 minute and 39 seconds long. It's got a little charminess to it, but I think it's kind of a rewind backwards a little bit. And I think they're kind of past this, but that's just my opinion. Listen to it. It's still a fine song. Now we'll go to Sheena is a Punk Rocker, as discussed in Sean's last Ramones review for RTTC. Remember, you can watch it after this. An early version of the song had already appeared on later U.S. issues of the Ramones' second album, Leave Home, due to the aftermath of that album's own notorious Carbona Not Glue fiasco. But it is the version contained on this album that has since come to be regarded as the definitive one, hence why I prefer it to be reacted to here. In any case, the widely shared sense that this gloriously fun tune had the potential to be something quite special in its own right was later summed up by its writer, Joey Ramone, who recalled, quote, I played Sheena for Sires Records president Seymour Stein. He flipped out and said, we got to record that song now. It was like back in the 50s. You'd rush into the studio because you thought you had a hit, then put it right out. To me, Sheena was the first surf punk rock teenage rebellion song. I combine Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, with the primalness of punk rock. Then Sheena is brought into the modern day. It was funny because all the girls in New York seemed to change their name to Sheena after that. Everybody was a Sheena, end quote. I've never met a Sheena in my life. I mean, I know Sheena Easton, but as a result of this, the song which Legs McNeil once memorably described as, quote, the great punk hope for radio airplay, did in fact become one of the band's most globally successful singles to date, reached as high as number 22 in the UK upon its release in May of 1977. Although once again, such success was not reflected in the Ramones' American homeland, where it only reached as high as number 81 at its peak, with Ramones manager Danny Fields summing up the sense of frustrated potential that often surrounded both song and album alike as a result as follows, quote, it's very sad. All they needed was one big hit and they could have sold 2 million albums. Sheena could have done it, end quote. Despite all this, however, the song itself remains as primarily exciting and even beautiful in its own wild way as its fictional namesake ever was. And I hope you'll agree. And I'll say this. We talked about how Sire Records and then later Warner Brothers Records were behind them. So you had to get two things, especially in this period of time. You had to get the record company behind you. That was number one. With that, nothing else happens. But you also had to get the radio industry and the DJs behind you. So if I'm going to have to assign blame, not being there at the time, I mean, I was alive, but I was 6. I'm going to say a lot of this goes to the DJs because he's exactly right. If you would have had one hit, album sales were such a big thing. You like a song, you just go buy the album. It was just kind of what we did back in the day for a long, long time, more than the cassette or than the CD. That would have done it. Once they got mass critical success and mass sales success, then the next album would have been looked forward to and the rest would have been history. But it just wasn't meant to be, man. Great song. Also interesting, right? Because you have so many different musical styles and vocal styles. This is more the mumbled, kind of distant vocal on here. So there's something for everybody, right? There's something for everybody with Ramones, but a classic and really good. Next up, we have We're a Happy Family. According to Everett True, once again, this freakishly compelling tune is, quote, the song that sums up the Ramones' deranged worldview best. A hilarious tale of everyday folk in Queens stealing dope and gay dads. It's like the Ramones theme, a history lesson for the fans that wondered where Da Brothers' pantheon of freaks came from. Of course, everyone is off their head in the classical dysfunctional American family. Why wouldn't they be? We're a Happy Family. What a wonderfully produced song. The layering there, the last 30 seconds of building that atmosphere. The lyricism is great. This is what I'm talking about. A song a couple of songs ago, I Don't Care, when I was talking about, the basic lyrics and song structure, where this song, it's just brilliantly put together. He's just rapid fire and stuff. Painting the picture there in Queens, they're eating their refried beans. They have no Christmas cards to send. And, mentions, that his dad's gay and they're selling dad's drugs and we're a happy family, they have that impression to everybody. I just thought it was a really, really intelligently done song. Next up, we have Teenage Lobotomy. According to Ed Stasium, if there is a greatest Ramones song that I recorded, then it has to be this one. It's a mini Ramones symphony. It has every element of what's great about them in one song. The big drum intro and the lobotomy chant, the little background harmony ooze, the subject matter. Not a lot of bands had modulations in their songs. The Ramones always had modulations. They were always changing the key. Teenage Lobotomy, I see what Ed's saying. The modulations, the key changes, it's a classic Ramones song in that way, in the sound. Except we have Do You Want to Dance? The first, and for my money, the best, Evan David says, of Rocket to Russia's 2 cover songs, which, as Everett True reminds us, was a hit previously for Bobby Freeman, the Beach Boys, and Bette Midler, but never with such unbridled joy. This deliriously irresistibly fun tune, which was even issued as a single in March of 78, reaching 86 in the singles charts, at least it made the Hot 100, provides one of the most purely enjoyable examples of what Legs McNeil calls the Ramones' tendency to slip, quote, a cover song on every album so that the moronic masses would experience a correlation between that great old rock and roll and their great new rock and roll. Yeah, not a lot to say about this song. I think they did a really good job. They sound really good, and they always leave you wanting more, and that is something that a lot of bands could have definitely taken a lesson from. I'm talking to you, 90s bands with 7-minute ongoing songs. All right, next up we got I Want to Be Well, an oddly compelling and even heartfelt tune, perhaps especially given its writer Joey Ramone's own history of chronic physical and mental health problems, which he has dealt with over the years, up to and including his then recent accident, as we talked about earlier. The song also aptly demonstrates one of the major lyrical themes on the album, and indeed the Ramones' career as a whole, namely mental illness, with the band, once again, to quote Everett True, influenced by their late-night diet of schlock horror TV and warped comics, Dee Dee's drug abuse, and Joey's spell inside a mental institution. But it was so comical, so human. Nowhere did you feel the Ramones were patronizing their dysfunctional subjects. A quality which also comes across well from that same rainbow legendary Rainbow Gig, December 31st, 1977. We're going to watch it live. Another good performance, a more subdued song. I mean, parts of it they get after, but see how tight they were as a band. Very professional and very good subject matter. All right, we got 4 songs left. We got I Can't Give You Anything, another of the more comparatively underappreciated tunes on Rocket to Russia. The starkly hard-nosed but humorous Dee Penn look at the difficulties of keeping a relationship going on a chronically low budget. That's tough, boys and girls. Been there. Nevertheless, remains something of a Ramones hidden gem for me, and as such, is well worth its place on this album. All right, not a lot to the lyrics, but yeah, he's just letting her know, I don't have anything, so you better decide what you want, because at least he's letting her know up front. He's not pretending to be somebody he's not. Next up, we have Ramona. Evan David says, on the surface, nothing more than a good old-fashioned, not to say old-school rock and roll love song. Some Ramones fans over the years have apparently suggested that its name may have been inspired by that of a female engineer who worked on the Rocket to Russia album. An interesting idea, to be sure, albeit one that's been frankly dismissed by Ed Stasium, who insisted at one point that, quote, Johnny had her kicked off the session. No women were allowed to be around. The song would have been written well before they met her, end quote. In any case, Evan David says, it still remains a fun little tune, regardless of its origins. Ramona, just a nice sound, nice guitar melody, good vocals, good harmonies. Little Ramona is actually a spy, so watch out, boys and girls. Our penultimate song, we got Surfing Bird. The second of the album's 2 covers, this raucous version of the notoriously nonsensical yet earworming 1964 hit by the Trashmen, which was later made more famous by being in the animated show The Family Guy, was apparently inspired by having seen cult punk rockabilly band The Cramps, who are very good in their own right, perform their own live version at CBGB's to boot. Nevertheless, as Legs McNeil once again puts it, Surfing Bird seemed like a Ramones song long before there ever was a Ramones. I mean, they could have written it, right? And no one ever sang a better Papa O Mau Mau than Joey Ramone, nor better perfected the guttural descent into hell that the song requires for its hook. What a description. Okay, I knew that song once it came on. I don't know it greatly, but I know it because it's so unique. But yeah, they did a fantastic job with it. It definitely could have been their song. It just fits their style so well. They're able to push into it and not make it sound cartoonish. No shout out to Family Guy there, but they pull it off in a way that seems serious and well done. All right, we're there. We go to the last track. Why is it always this way? A typically deranged but fun Ramones tune. This closing song also aptly sums up the long-suffering but still somehow hanging on spirit of the album, and indeed of the Ramones' career thus far as a whole. And while major changes would indeed soon be occurring behind the scenes with regard to the band's future lineup, for now it serves as an effective signpost of the somewhat stymied career state which he had reached by this point. All right, why is it always this way? Great little inflections there, style, harmony. It's a good way to finish off a 14-track album, albeit quick song, so it's always a fun ride. Now, before we get to my favorite tracks, we'll get to Evan David's. His top 3 in reverse order are Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, Do You Want to Dance, and Rockaway Beach, with honorable mentions for Locket Love, I Don't Care, Teenage Lobotomy, I Can't Give You Anything, and I Want to Be Well. And he also wants to wish everyone at RTTC a hearty, I think it's going to be Happy Holidays and Merry Christmas. It's in Welsh, and I'm not even going to attempt it because it'll be disrespectful. Now we'll get to my favorite tracks. Honorable mention, Locket Love, Teenage Lobotomy, Do You Want to Dance, and Surfin' Bird. Faves are going to be Rockaway Beach, Sheena is a Punk Rocker, and We're a Happy Family. Now get to my overall score. I honestly really like all 3 of the albums I've done so far. I didn't really know that I just love the Ramones. I mean, I knew of them and all that good stuff, but I never listened to their albums all the way through or anything like that. Never really dove into them. Kind of maybe had a little different opinion of them going into this, but it's been a fun ride. So, I mean, I don't know if this one stands out for me. I like them all in different ways, right? I mean, this is going to be an 8.5. I mean, it's really, really good. There's no bad songs on here. I mean, it's just really, really well done. I'll actually go an 8.75 now that I think about it. I'll go an 8.75. So I think the first one, because of its impact, is so iconic and different that, maybe it stands out a little more for me, but I don't think the first one's probably the best album, if that makes sense. If you're a Ramones fan, that probably makes a lot of sense. But let me know what you think of this one down below. Where do you fit it in their catalog? I know a lot of fans and critics especially hold it up as their best. Thanks again to Evan David for bringing this one. Don't forget, we still got 2 more left in the ride of the first 5 Ramones discography. All right, guys, if you haven't already, give it a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And until next time, I will see ya.